For the first month, Thornwell insisted he was innocent. Then, unable to take any more of the intense interrogation, he made up a confession, admitting he stole the documents and supposedly telling how he did it. The Army checked his story out. It didn't hold up, not at all. So they continued to interrogate Thornwell, and Thornwell continued to confess, continued, in fact, to say anything which would stop his torture. It was then that the Army hit upon a bizarre solution, a plan combining terror and LSD. On June 12th, 1961, in this room, after 24 hours of continuous interrogation, Thornwell was given LSD without his knowledge. Suddenly, Army officers burst inside and ran him down 4 flights of stairs. On the street, he was handcuffed, blindfolded, and forced into a waiting car. As Thornwell was sped out of Orleans, he was told that the French police were following and would kill him if they caught him. Thornwell had reason to believe this, as he had previously been threatened with death by these same police. A staged threat, although Thornwell didn't know that. The car crossed the Loire River, and Thornwell was told that the police were gaining on them. This had all been prearranged with the French police. Thornwell heard the brakes squeal, and he felt the car swerve as it was forced to a stop. He was pulled out the door, and as his blindfold was removed, Thornwell saw the French police approaching with drawn pistols. Thornwell was ordered into their car, and the French police drove him away. Inside the car was an American Army officer who explained that he could stop the French police from seizing Thornwell only if Thornwell were to tell the truth about the documents. This was to be Thornwell's last chance. The car stopped and Thornwell got out. Thornwell was dizzy from LSD, which had been slipped into a glass of water he'd been given earlier. With his head reeling from the LSD, Thornwell was led through this door and into the old mill. The combination of the dangerous drug and Thornwell's terrorized state of mind was having its intended effect.
I was at a table. I was with one of the agents. This man looked quite grotesque. He looked like he had probably been dead for 200 years. I mean, his skin didn't look real. He said, James, he says, you're in a lot of trouble. So I have to know, do you have the documents? I said, no. He said, if you have them, you must turn them over to me. He said, it won't make any difference whether you turn them over to me or not. We just want the documents so that we can have them and so that they won't fall into the wrong hands. I said, I don't have the documents. He says, where did you put them? I said, I haven't put them anywhere. Yes, you put them somewhere. And I said, no. He said, well, James, I assure you, nothing's going to happen. And we talked back and forth for a few minutes, and then all of a sudden, I just stiffened. As if somebody had turned, like I was in an electric chair, and somebody turned the juice on. And I just sort of froze, and my skin began to raise up on my bone. And I looked down to see if I was growing larger, because it felt like I had just gained 100 pounds. And he said to me, he says, you'll be all right. He says, just tell me what the documents are. I said, I don't know what they are. He says, yes, you do. And my head went over on the desk, and my head began to swell. And I felt my face, and I couldn't even feel my face. And I grabbed my head, and I hold it. And he said, crawl over here. And I said, I'm not going to crawl. Stay right here. And I find myself crawling across the floor. Let's say sit in a chair. I said, no, I can't sit in that chair. I was sitting in that chair once. I felt like my mind had left my body. That my mind was sitting way out there in space. And I was sitting there looking at my own brain. And I just reached for it. kept reaching for it, and I just kept, and I found myself up against the table, and he was saying, "Where's the documents?" And I was reaching for my mind, and it was just moving, and it was just moving.
What's up, Black family? What's up? This is Super Mike. Super Mike, press the like button. Please press the like button right now. You can press the subscribe button. Subscribe to the channel. Press the bell icon so you get each upload that I put on, and share the message. Go ahead and share it. I want us to question ourselves. You know, when we talk about developing, if we're serious about getting the black community in a winning position, we need to actually ask ourselves, what does that look like? So, number one, engendering a sense of family, of trust. You have to have trust. You have to look at your community as your responsibility. You have to take responsibility. And it's something that you do in your heart. This is something that you do in your heart. This is your birthright. This community is your birthright. It doesn't matter what it looks like right now. It is your birthright. And it's very important to know, to think about. You think about the people of the past who knew what was going on and tried to prepare us, to prepare our parents to survive, to make sure some kind of information got through all of the trials, the tribulations that they knew would happen. Think about W.E.B. Du Bois in 1960. He said integration will cause you to lose your culture. They will cause these teachers to destroy your children's knowledge of their own history. This is why many of us are walking around, we hate history. When history is some of the best stories, some of the best things that you would love to engage in. Your own people's history. Very, very exciting, very engaging if you're reading the right stuff, because you'll see yourself in it. When we're dealing with the history in schools that we're being taught, you know, we don't see ourselves in that. And what these people are doing, there's a term called perception management. I want you to Google that term, perception management. Google it. Go ahead. Google perception management. And there's a lot of people, it's very useful. It's a useful program for a lot of people. But this is something that was developed by the United States military. This concept. And I'm pretty sure, I have not done the research, but I'm pretty sure that was developed based on knowledge and wisdom in dealing with us as a group. Because one of the foundations of the military weaponization of perception management is to use tools and techniques such as misinformation, disinformation, lies, and hiding vital information. So you're able to target an audience with a certain type of propaganda where you affect what they believe and how they believe it. And I say that to say this. If somebody is your enemy and always means you harm, they're able to do harmful things to you consistently, and you keep allowing that person around. Why would you do that? Why would you do that? That's because you don't perceive them as an enemy. Or you don't perceive, there's something wrong with the way that your perception of that person is, or that entity is. And that's where black folks, we gotta work with that. A guy named Ronald Siegel, he was bragging about how he was teaching monkeys how to smoke rock cocaine in the basement of UCLA. They tested it on the locals in the neighborhood, blacks in South Central LA. That's where it was tested. Crack. And that particular substance was available to the government, to the CIA. There's a thing called,
MK Ultra.
During the early period of the Cold War in the late 40s and early 1950s, the CIA became paralyzed with a fear that communists had perfected some kind of a drug or a potion or a technique that would allow them to control human minds. This was actually a greatly exaggerated fear, but it played on something cultural that affected everybody that grew up in the early 20th century. We were fed a lot of books and movies about the idea of mind control, that you could hypnotize someone or give someone a drug that would make them do something that otherwise they would never do. And seized by this myth, the CIA not only believed that communists had approached or reached this holy grail, but that the CIA should also find out a way to do it. So MK Ultra was a project lasting up to 10 years in which the CIA sought to find ways to control the human mind. They wanted to be able to have a truth serum that would make prisoners say everything they knew. Also an amnesiac that would make people forget what they had done. And most important, a technique or a drug that would allow the CIA to direct agents to carry out acts like sabotage or assassination, and then forget who had ordered them to do it, or even that they had carried out the actions at all. So MK Ultra was the most sustained search in history for techniques of mind control.
What are we going to do with this information? When you internalize information, it affects your perception, and it gives you a more rational and effective perception so that you don't ignore vital information. We have a lot of blind spots. And I don't care how much information you got, just based upon your the way you were raised, you're going to have blind spots. There's certain information that you're going to, for your own sanity, you're just going to ignore some of this information because you're just not ready to internalize it. So when we're dealing with the crack cocaine epidemic, it was released in 1985. And somehow, if people do the history, do the research, you'll see that somehow this crack cocaine seems to get from LA, because people in LA are aware that crack cocaine was going around. But it was able to get from LA straight to New York and kind of sandwich the country in. From LA to New York and squeeze this in. So this is chemical warfare. Now, we all had the experience of crackheads. We had highly addictive crackheads, stealing. We had the crack dealer who became a dangerous person. This was a source of income for a lot of young black men and some families. But this source of income was a destructive source of income and it was a very dangerous source of income. But these runners were allowed to crisscross the country and to bring this substance and this cocaine inside the country. And there's a movie called Made in America starring Tom Cruise. I encourage people to look at that because it talks about it talks about one of the runners for the CIA to supply, crack cocaine. Yeah, it talks about that the United States government under Ronald Reagan and Oliver North and then the CIA not only invented and distributed and profited off of crack cocaine, destroying hundreds of thousands and millions of families, which we can see the effects of it still to this day. It's easier for us to just, we can talk about that all day. We don't have time for that. It's easy for us to forgive Joe Biden for a 94 crime bill when he was part of the government, him and Bill Clinton, and they knew that crack was a government-sponsored and created phenomenon put into the black communities for the specific reason. If you don't have crime in your community, what reason would you have to call the police? Why would you want the police there? You don't want police in your neighborhood if you don't have crime in your neighborhood. So we need to get crime in those neighborhoods. Credit drug. It takes media. Gary Webb in San Jose, the reporter, he was killed. They say he committed suicide, but the point is he exposed the CIA drug plot and proved it with receipts and everything. So this is shout out to Gary Webb, a white man. And the thing is, there were black people at that time who said that crack was an invention of the government.
This report confirms that the CIA essentially created, funded, supplied, and trained the Contras, and that the CIA was intimately involved in determining their strategy and running their operations. Meneses was never arrested by U.S. law enforcement. He was permitted free entrance to the United States and even issued a visa. How was this allowed, and why was it allowed to continue? Let me just say that Meneses dealt drugs in the United States for over 10 years or more. Starting back in 1974, he was a drug dealer before he came to the United States. He was even involved in a murder in Nicaragua. He dealt drugs without any interference, without any intervention. He had assets and businesses in San Francisco. As a matter of fact, Congresswoman Pelosi referred to the Frogman case. When they tracked down some of Meneses' people, they tracked them to the very house that was connected with the Frogman case where many of those people were involved. Meneses was well known by the CIA, the DEA, the DIA, and everybody in the United States as a drug dealer who was supplying the Emilio Blandone, who was supplying the Ricky Ross. How he stayed in the United States all of those years, being known from 1974, selling drugs that ended up helping to support the Contras, and nobody knew it, is absolutely amazing.
We have to start training ourselves to love our own people. We have to punish our people when they do evil, but we don't want to destroy them. And just like we can, it's easy for us to forgive Ronald Reagan and Joe Biden. It's easy for us to forgive you know, a guy that comes into your church and shoots 9 people up, murders them. We don't even think about it. It's easy for us to forgive a guy that goes into Kroger, a white man, looking for black people to shoot and murder. It's easy for us to forgive all these white mass murderers because the public is trained, our perception is literally trained to forgive whiteness. It allows them freedom of movement and freedom of activity, which allows them to do more, to advance more, to take higher risks, to take more risk. And when they take more risks, it's no wonder that they are out competing us. In general, black folks need to get it together. And all we want to do is talk about how some black person sold crack 30 years ago. You know, we don't want to forgive Freeway Ricky. He was an illiterate young teenager wanting money just like everybody else. He didn't know this game. We don't want to forgive him, though. It's hard for us to forgive that. He was held accountable. He stood in prison. He did prison time for his crimes. And he's dedicated his life to reverse the harm that he's done. You got to forgive that. So the thing is, my plea is I want black folks, we have to work to love ourselves, or love our kind. You have to rearrange the way that you perceive the facts. These are still the same facts. Everything is the same facts. But you have to wait. Your perception is 9/10 of your reality. The way you perceive the facts is going to determine the way that you behave in the type of future that you bring into existence. So if we say we want a thing, we have to try to adjust our emotional dispensation. We have to adjust our emotional fortitude in order to bring the thing that we want into existence. We can't say that black folks need to get it together and just, blast black people. No forgiveness. There's no mercy in our heart for our own people. But we have tons and tons of mercy in our hearts for all sorts of other peoples. We can't do that. So, and it's not easy because this is a way, but first of all, it has to come here first. You have to say factually, this is how I have to be. And then you have to try to figure out how do you get to this spot emotionally. But if we always forgiven, and it's easy for whites to or other groups of people to offend us. It's easy for us to spend money with Asians. But if a black person does one little thing that we don't like, bad customer service or something to that effect, maybe they don't open the store on time, or they short us something, a piece of, money or whatever, I don't know, or they speak to us wrong. We want to throw away all black businesses. These are the type of perceptions that a lot of black folks have. This is the reason why you can't compete as a group. You hate yourself. You can't do business and hate yourself. It won't work. So anyway, that's my rant. Thank you for listening. Click the thumbs up. I love you. Super Mike 2164. Super Mike Farad out. Peace.
The MK Ultra director, Sidney Gottlieb, can now be seen as the man who brought LSD to America. He was the unwitting godfather of the entire LSD counterculture. In the early 1950s, he arranged for the CIA to pay $240,000 to buy the world's entire supply of LSD. He brought this to the United States, and he began spreading it around to hospitals, clinics, prisons, and other institutions, asking them through bogus foundations to carry out research projects and find out what LSD was, how people reacted to it, and how it might be able to be used as a tool for mind control. Now, the people who volunteered for these experiments and began taking LSD, in many cases found it very pleasurable. They told their friends about it. Who were those people? Ken Kesey, the author of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, got his LSD in an experiment sponsored by the CIA, by MK-Ultra, by Sidney Gottlieb. So did Robert Hunter, the lyricist for the Grateful Dead, which went on to become a great purveyor of LSD culture. Allen Ginsberg, the poet who preached the value of the great personal adventure of using LSD, got his first LSD from Sidney Gottlieb, although, of course, he never knew that name. So CIA brought LSD to America. Not only was it roughly based on those experiments, but the CIA actually hired the vivisectionists and the torturers who had worked in Japan and in Nazi concentration camps to come and explain what they had found out so that we could build on their research. For example, Nazi doctors had conducted extensive experiments with mescaline at the Dachau concentration camp. And the CIA was very interested in figuring out whether mescaline could be the key to mind control. That was one of their big avenues of investigation. So they hired the Nazi doctors who had been involved in that project to advise them. Another thing the Nazis provided was information about poison gases like sarin, which is still being used. Nazi doctors came to America, to Fort Detrick in Maryland, which was the center of this project, to lecture to CIA officers to tell them how long it took for people to die from sarin. And was there a difference in how long it took to die if you were a small child or an infant, whether you were an elderly person or whether you were a healthy middle-aged person? The only way to know this would be to have killed all those people. The CIA was eager to get this kind of information. And actually, one of the things that is the most bizarre about the fact that we relied on Nazi doctors is that Sidney Gottlieb himself was Jewish, and his parents had emigrated from Central Europe in the early 20th century. If they had not emigrated, Sidney Gottlieb might well himself have been brought up in Central Europe, forced into a ghetto, brought to a concentration camp, and become the subject of one of these grotesque Nazi medical experiments. Nonetheless, he didn't seem to have any problem working as a CIA officer with the doctors who conducted those experiments.
Yeah, I found that pretty hard to understand. But, also Kurt Blome, one of the Nazi doctors who was hired by Sidney Gottlieb, was on trial in Nuremberg. He was acquitted, but he was one of the Nazi doctors who was tried. And the Nuremberg Code established that if you are conducting experiments, that the person you are experimenting on needs to give informed consent. And of course, MK-Ultra totally violated the Nuremberg Code, but apparently the U.S. never signed on to that, never adapted that.
If the United States had used the Nuremberg Code domestically, Sidney Gottlieb would never have been able to do what he did. There couldn't have been MK-Ultra. What Sidney Gottlieb did is exactly what we sentenced Nazi doctors to death after the Second World War for doing in concentration camps.